All right. Welcome, everyone. I am Robin Gross. I'm in charge of programs for the Print Society for the present. This summer that will be changing, but welcome everyone today for our program. A lot of fresh new faces here today. The next program we're going to have will be in May, and actually what we're going to have is a panel discussion of Kansas City Art Institute students visiting with us about the day in a life of an art student today, in today's world. Be a very interesting panel. We're really looking forward to it. And Laura Berman, who teaches there, will be moderating that panel. So we welcome all of you back for that program. I have a sign-in sheet, and I'm tempted to pass it around, but I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set it back on that little bar counter next to the video camera. And if everyone, I know everyone's going to remember to do this an hour from now. I'll keep my fingers crossed that you'll remember to come up and sign in, because we do like to keep track of numbers. It does help the Print Society overall. Any announcements, anything for the Society in general that I should make? Okay. Then I will introduce our speaker for today, Karl Marxhausen, who grew up in Seward, Nebraska. As a teenager, stood behind a Super 8 movie camera on a tripod and directed a grown-up in a full-body rabbit suit, also the bulldozer driver of the Seward City dump, and along with a dozen other grown-ups dressed as secret agents in suits and sunglasses. He produced a 20-minute video with 20 other adults in it. He attended the University of Nebraska at Lincoln, where he earned his Bachelor of Arts, Fine Arts degree. And as a student, he coaxed dorm residents to sing and play their songs on the snack bar stage of the Nyhard complex. He got the sound system from the student union, set it up, and went on to generate 3 people's concerts in this same venue. Batching it in his hometown while working as a night security guard, he sought out wood carvers and painters and formed the Seward Artist Group. They met for potluck meals and talked about their art. Years later in Carrollton, Missouri, he painted landscapes and again sought out fellow artists. He organized one-day art shows for this group, the Carrollton Artist Group, and at one artist gathering, his friend did a glass bead demo, and everyone went home with a glass bead that they had created during that event. In another exhibit, one of the artists featured was woodcut artist Frank Geary, who we are going to learn more about today. Currently, Karl continues to work in his studio, and his day job consists of working with grade school students as a teacher's aide in the behavior management program at Chillicothe, Missouri. Excuse me. In his ever-present intention to seek out and contribute to community, Karl is the founder of the Print Society's blog, to which we are indebted to and appreciate greatly. All of the members here have seen it, and we thank him deeply for that. He and his wife Jan are members of the Print Society, and they live in Carrollton, Missouri. Intersections with Fred Geary, swept up by the revival. Intersections with Fred Geary, swept up by the revival. This is the title of his talk today. Please join me in a warm welcome for Karl Marxhausen.
Good afternoon. We're going to get right into it. In 1939, Fred Geary served as a member of the regional jury for selecting graphic art for the World's Fair held in New York. Ernest Hubert Dines. Who is Ernest Hubert Dines? My research led me to David J. Cope, a retired history teacher in Pennsylvania, who told me that at the 1939 World's Fair, there was an American Art Today catalog that talked about there's regions represented. And Region 2 included the states of Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, and a subclass which included Kansas, Nebraska, North and South Dakota, and Arkansas. And the people represented from our area included Ernest Hubert Dines, Fred Geary, John DeMattar, oh, he has a name, and Rossiter Howard Chairman. And he went on to say that both Dines and Geary exhibited one piece at the World's Fair. Dines had an entry, a wood engraving entitled Pippins Come Down. It looked like an apple orchard, and Geary's entry was a linoleum print entitled On the River. It looked like a steamboat on the Missouri or the Mississippi River. Okay, if there's any librarians in the bunch, Marilyn, yay, you're here. I have files for you to start. All the characters that I'm talking about today are in that, so. Okay, we'll move along. No, that's not my notes. Doesn't matter. Okay, Dines is important because he wrote a biography on his deceased friend in 1947. And if memory serves, he wrote that Geary was actually born in Clarence, Missouri, and his birthday is in May of 1896. And then he died in Carrollton. And I don't have that date with me. But Dines wrote this sort of difficult to read, but just full of enthusiasm for his friend, Fred Geary. And so, I've got that here. Okay. So what this is a picture of Carrollton. And in the upper left, that's a picture of the Geary house where he lived on South Main. The lower left-hand corner is the railroad station. And on the right is the Carroll County Courthouse. Oh, I've got those dates right here. I've got it right here. He died October 13, 1946, at the age of 52. His father's job brought the family to Carrollton when Fred was 18 months old, around 1895. That red dot is where my wife and I live, in Carrollton. So how far is it from Kansas City? It's about 90 miles east and north of Kansas City, Missouri. Geary's father, James F. Geary, worked as a station agent for the Santa Fe Railroad. He was in charge of all the shipping accounts for the city of Carrollton. This ad in the middle reads, "The trains of the Santa Fe are confidently recommended to a discriminating traveling public as unsurpassed in the important items of speed, safety, and luxurious equipment. The dining car service under the supervision of Fred Harvey is unrivaled. 4 trains daily to California. For information, address J.F. Geary, agent, Carrollton, Missouri." And this ad came from the 1914 Nautilus Carrollton High School yearbook. 17-year-old Fred Geary was one of 2 art editors for the Nautilus yearbook his senior year at Carrollton High. The other was classmate Ray Perkins. Both graduated in 1914. And the Nautilus yearbook came courtesy of John Jackson, who is here today with his wife from Odessa. Could you raise your hand, John? Yes, yep. And Perkins, Julia, where are you? Okay, say your full name.
Julia Ellen Parkins Murray.
Okay, so it was her father. She emailed me. My father was art editor with the Nautilus and all that, so she knows everybody from Carrollton. And she's here today, so I am tickled pink. That's why I look pink. Here are two photos of Mr. Geary from the collection of the Carrollton Public Library. At left, snapshot of Fred Geary taken about 1915 when he was a student at the Kansas City Art Institute. On the right, the Missouri artist Fred Geary as he appeared during the last year of his life. He wore glasses, which is barely seen in this enlarged snapshot. Okay, if you are a current student at the Kansas City Art Institute, raise your hand. Okay, no one. If you are a teacher at the Art Institute, raise your hand. Okay. And if you are on staff or know somebody who went to school, raise your hand. Okay, that's better. Well, thanks for attending today. Fred Geary attended your school. In his paper, Dines named the schools that Geary attended: William Jules College in Liberty, Missouri, a small art school in Kansas City, not a great distance from his hometown of Carrollton, and at one time the Art Students League in New York. Now, through an email through William Jules, Tanya Campbell agreed that according to the records, Fred Geary did attend Jewel from 1914 to 1918. There was a 1915 Carrollton Nautilus High School yearbook had a short entry that said, Fred Geary attended William Jewell College with Pete Trotter, where they were both members of the Sigma Nu fraternity. Online, the Sigma Nu fraternity general catalog in 1918 stated that in 1915, Pete Trotter was listed as a student living at 204 North Main in Carrollton, while Fred Geary was listed as an artist at the Fine Arts Institute, 1020 McGee Street in Kansas City, residing at South Main Street in Carrollton, Missouri. Of that school, the American Art Annual of 1911 said, the Fine Arts Institute is listed at the YMCA building, 1020 McGee Street, Kansas City, Missouri. At that time, Charles W. Moore was president, Howard E. Hustleton was secretary, J.C. Ford was vice president, and J.F. Downing was treasurer. Dines names the instructors Geary had in 1914. He had Charles A. Wimolski, well-known painter, etcher, and woodcutter from Chicago; Merle Gage, a well-known sculptor and teacher of anatomy; and Norman Tolson in the commercial branches. Later, George Bridgman at the Art Students League in New York. Well, I got an email clarifying that, yes, Geary did go to the Art Students League, but it was in 1928, and his teacher was John Sloan, and he had a life class. And at the time, she said, I have one record for Fred Geary, who listed his city address at the President Hotel, West 48th Street, but his home was in Kansas City, Missouri. And the librarian at the Kansas City librarian said that the record said that he was a student in 1928. He did not graduate, and he did not have a diploma. He was not a diploma student. Those were the good old days. You could still get a job and not have a college degree. This is out of 1922 Kansas City Art Institute booklet in the archives with a caption which read, streetcar cards, postal cards, envelopes, decorative posters, and paintings of Indian ceremonies in a wide variety of colors are the work of Mr. Fred Geary, now the head of the art department of the Fred Harvey Company, whose art institute training is the basis of his present success and indicates a bright future in his chosen field. In 1918, Geary entered the workforce. He was hired by the Fred Harvey Company at the Union Station. His office number eventually would be room 362. So today, right after this, run out to the Union Station, go to the second floor. There's an elevator. It's right above the south side when you enter. And you'll see the first Harvey House, Topeka Depot mural by Fred Geary. Take the elevator up, and my arrow here indicates that right under those green bushes, you'll see an FG, and that stands for Fred Geary. Here's a dining room mural that Geary did. This was on display in 2010 at the Union Station. Roughly 2 feet tall and about 8 feet wide. 3 signboards painted for the Harvey Company, and these were on display in 2010. Here is the El Navajo Fred Harvey Hotel in Gallup, New Mexico, painted by the Harvey artist Fred Geary. The painting measures 16 1/4 by 26 3/8 inches. It is owned by my friend and Carrollton artist, Joe Tonner Jr. He got it from his father, Joe Tonner Sr. There are postcards designed after this painting. And if you were right in front of it, you could still see the penciled lines underneath the wash. For more on what artwork Geary did with the Harvey Company, check out this book by Dr. Joan Stack. It's entitled Fred Geary, Missouri Master of the Woodcut. It's printed by the State Historical Society of Missouri in 2012. My blog, Fred Geary, Swept Up by the Revival, was referenced in this book. By 1922, the Art Institute had moved to Warwick and Armour Boulevard in the Phil Toll House, which you can see in the lower right-hand corner. This is where the studios, the lecture rooms, and the galleries were located. This is where the Midwestern artist exhibitions were held. This map shows the KCI campus in relationship to where Geary was working at the Union Station. Dines wrote, "Busy years went by, about 14, before much thought could be given to advancement in other directions. Yet being 35 years old would in no way deter him from finer accomplishment. Using a couple reference books, Geary taught himself woodcuts, or xylography, as it was called back then. Dines shared about Geary. The execution of a woodblock spelled contentment. One after another, the blocks yielded to confidence. He rubbed linseed oil thoroughly into every block and painted the outer edges, and then wrapped each piece of wood carefully. Preparatory to drawing on the block, it had to be coated white." And here's some language that Dines says. He was a very thoughtful writer. "Seldom thought of by the beholder is the slow, exacting coordination of labor with a sustained and inspired feeling for endless experimenting in inks, wood, and paper. A certain mental makeup is an effective ingredient. Patience, thoroughness, and an immersion in craftsmanship lead to mastery." And then on another page, I guess he had a funny side and he was known for his laughter. "Outwardly, with a serious turn of mind, underneath lurked a fine sense of humor. Being a man's man made him capable of relishing a good joke, and the gusto of his laughter sometimes reverberated down to one's shoes' soles." This piece here is called Winter Day by Fred Geary. It's a woodcut in 1932. It is also called Untitled. A lot of Geary's work was called Untitled. And if you looked at a lot of his prints, there would be no title on it. But he would always sign it, block print, Fred Geary in the corner. This measures 4 7/8 by 7 3/8 inches. It was exhibited in the Midwestern Artist Exhibition, January 28th through February 28th in 1932. The impression is 8 of 50, signed in pencil by the artist. This print is in the Fred Geary collection at the Carrollton Public Library in Carrollton, Missouri. It is not known how often Geary made it on campus, since his work at the Harvey Company required traveling to locations in the Southwest. But from 1922 to 1931, there were many block prints on view at the Midwestern Artist Exhibition. This was a nugget when I found this. Dines writes, he was the treasurer of the Kansas City Society of Artists about 1933 and showed genuine interest in the organization's activities. What was that group? It was a surprise to me to find an important clue on the back of one of Geary's watercolors at the Carrollton Public Library. This label gave a specific Kansas City street address for the Kansas City Society of Artists, 1718 Holly Street. I found it on the road map and I drove there, and this is what I found. What I found was an empty lot, overgrown with brush, a leveled foundation. There were no files on this, not at the Janus Library, not at Missouri Valley Special Collections, not at the Miller Library at UMKC, not at the Spencer Art Reference Library at the Nelson Museum. My ally at Missouri Valley Special Collections was librarian Sherry Klein Smith, and this is what she wrote to me. I made it into work today and have spent some time looking at the city directories for 1718 Holly. I skipped to 1930 and found George P. Whithorn listed, followed by Fern Rooms, which means furnished rooms. I skipped again to 1933 and found several entries with that address, one being Lighton Studio. Attached is an image from that year. In 1935, it is listed simply as Lighton Studio, and in 1938. I checked 1931, and this was the first time the Lighton Studio is listed as 1718 Holly. So we can see here that 5 artists are listed at this residence. Who was Ela M. Kibbe, John W. Orth, Robert Haslam, Emma Simoni, Emmett Craig. This piece of information got me excited. That was part of the world that Fred Geary knew about. He was part of that art scene. So who are the Kansas City Society of Artists? Fellow detectives and super sleuths, of which we have a few in the audience today. Who were these artists? There was no file on the Kansas City Society of Artists. There was no file on the 1718 Holly Street or the Lighton Studios. My research help from others is establishing that file. Again, if you're a librarian, talk to me. There are handouts to start building your own file for these groups. Here is something worth digging up. I encourage curiosity. Be like Liz Hansen and Roland Sabates. There are nuggets to be found right here. Go for it. Sherry Klein continued in her email. Having found the name Lighton Studio, I searched the digital gallery, which includes the local history index, and found this record for a vertical file for Jim Spencer. So I pulled the file and found an article there about an exhibition of Spencer's work at the library. The article said, during the 30s, Spencer's work were frequently exhibited in the old Lighton Studio, 1718 Holly, which was a gathering place for Kansas City artists and musicians. during that period. It was also the headquarters of the Kansas City Society of Artists, of which Spencer was a member. And then another fellow researcher, Heather Paxton, said, oh yeah, there's that one guy who used to do the covers for the Independent Society. And but every time she goes by a broken down building, she thinks of him. And his name is Jim somebody. Well, on the right of this picture is Granary Number 2 by Jim Ed Spencer of Independence. It's a lino cut. They're rather large. And it comes courtesy of Missouri Valley Special Collections, Kansas City Public Library downtown. They have over a dozen different linoleum cuts from Mr. Spencer. That could make a good program. They're just lying there. Okay. Miss Smith sent me charts of the 1718 Holly Street. It was off a website called historicmapworks.com. I've added arrows. This is off a 1925 Kansas City map. On the left there you have the Kansas City stockyards. Due north is up. And then to the right there you have looking east, and the arrows pointing toward a hotel, which we'll have pictures of, which is where that site was at. I've added the arrows here. Sherry continued, then I looked in our newspaper clipping index, which was not online, and found an entry for Lighton, Gertrude W., 1930, KC Society of Artists, headquarters, Bohemian Colony. That article I could scan from microfilm and is attached. I think these things will give you a good idea about the house and its occupants. I hope this is what you were looking for. And this is from the Journal Post, October 19th, 1930, page 60, and that's in the file here. So. The article begins. I'm only reading some of this. You'll have to look up the rest. The ingenuity of Gertrude W. Lighton has worked an Arabian Nights change throughout the once abandoned West Side Hotel, where Kansas City's newest art center, the Lighton Studios, now are flourishing. You will find this glamorous new version of Bohemia on 1718 Holly, just south of Kersey Coates Drive. It is the permanent headquarters of the Kansas City Society of Artists. I remember talking with David Boutros at his office at UMKC. He is the assistant director of the State Historical Society of Missouri Research Center in Kansas City. He said there were larger galleries at the time in Kansas City, like the Finley Art Gallery and the Thorne Gallery. But the Lighton Studios was something else. It was a studio and a gallery. It was her personal project. As I read this October 1930 newspaper account, it jumped out everywhere. From the deep cleaning of mold, the new plumbing, new lights, new paint, placing exotic furniture, Chinese antiques, and so on, Gertrude Wolfe Lighton took it on herself to make this place something special. The place was really a reflection of herself. Consider these words written to remember her by. Gertrude Lighton was a real part of the world we live in here. Her interests were such that she created an oasis for us, a place to regain ourselves away from this mainstream of a rushing world. She loved art and beauty in a great variety of ways. She loved people who loved things. She had the heart of a girl who always was ready to accept some new wonder. Her years at 17 Holly Street will live for a long time in the memory of our town. She created a unique, warm atmosphere where artists lived and worked, and memorable luncheons were served to the public. Gertrude Lighton was interested in doing and being herself. And if you wanted to get in and go along with her, her face would light up and she would take you to her heart. She had a natural self-conscious generosity, and when she heard of people in need, it never occurred to her not to jump in and do something about them. This is from an unsigned eulogy courtesy of Terry Mooney, a descendant of Gertrude Wolfe Lighton. I've met with and talked with Linda Lighton and her cousin, the late J.D. Lighton. There are many things that can be said, but for this talk, what bubbles to the surface for me is Gertrude loved to cook. Downstairs in the tea room, in the tiny jade kitchen behind the screen, Mrs. Lighton made the sandwiches herself. It was Linda Lighton who felt it was below someone of her stature. She should have had a servant do it. Indeed, J.D. Mooney, who told me that when Gertrude lived at the Walnuts near the Country Club Plaza, there was a gigantic kitchen and she had 2 cooks. She really didn't have to do any cooking. But that was Gertrude, wanting to be there in the middle of it, engaged and giving of herself. What a model for our time. So I see Gertrude in you. I see this kind of giving when you hosted a society talk at your house. You prepared refreshments and you made people feel welcome. That's a good thing. We can look at each other and celebrate. Yeah, people still do that today. Joe Stockwell was telling me about the Wolfe Brother ads his father did. Gail Stockwell, an artist that Gertrude knew, had a studio there, and he taught life study classes on Sundays. He also liked to kick back and write. Joe, now a grown-up himself in Arizona and a watercolorist like his father, recalled his folks talking about their life at the Lighton Studios. Stockwell said, "I believe they had a studio on the top floor and moved from there to a small farm near Parkville in the early 1930s. This is the sculptor, Dr. Emmett Craig, creating a clay likeness of one of Mrs. Lighton's daughters in his studio space. This is a painting by Emma Simoni. Emma Simoni was the well-known American miniature painter who received an order from Queen Alexandra from England to paint the portraits of the Queen's grandchildren, the children of the Duke of Fife. Here is a painting Simoni did of one of Mrs. Lighton's daughters. So it begs the question, how did someone on the East Coast know about something in Kansas City? And I have no idea. And it just raises the question, what influence did that entity have in the region? And since Mrs. Lighton's maiden name was Wolfe, I need to throw this in there, about the Wolfe brothers, some of their history. After the Civil War, her father, Alfred, and Uncle Samuel started a shirt factory. They got permission from the government to make clothes to order for the soldiers at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. That business moved to Kansas City in 1877, 1 year after she was born. Starting with making handmade tailor shirts and a laundry, would grow into the well-known Wolfe Brothers clothing store. This is Gertrude when she was 20-something. At 20 years, Gertrude took part in the 1896 Paint Club under George Van Millet. She gave financially to support it, along with, let's see if you've heard these names, William Rockhill Nelson, J.V.C. Carnes, and others. And this is according to Carrie Westlake Whitney in her book, Kansas City, Missouri, Its History and Its People, 1808 to 1908, Volume 1. 1932. In 1932, Fred Geary was one of 46 woodcut artists whose work was chosen by Alfred Fowler. His exhibition of contemporary woodcuts toured for a year and a half and was viewed by thousands of people in a dozen American cities. This piece, New Mexico by Fred Geary, 1932, is also called Untitled. It's also called Mexican on Donkey. This is in the print collection of the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art. Old House in Waverly by Fred Geary, 1932. This lino cut is also called Untitled and Farmhouse. The image measures 3 7/8 by 5 5/8 inches. It is in the Fred Geary collection at the Carrollton Public Library in Carrollton, Missouri. Ernest Dines wrote many things in his biography that I'm not including. But of Geary's woodcuts, he said, among contemporaries, the work of J.J. Lanks, Gustav Bauman, and several others, including a few workers in the same field abroad, he admired unreservedly. Lanks' vigorous line treatment, particularly for sky effects, suited his taste. This is The Old Maple Tree by Fred Geary, 1932. It is also called Untitled. This is The Steamboat Bixby by Fred Geary, 1932. This woodcut measures 5 7/8 by 9 1/4 inches. It is in the print collection of the State Historical Society of Missouri in Columbia, Missouri. In 1933, the first annual exhibition of contemporary woodcuts was on display at the Brooklyn Museum in New York. June 6, 1933 through June 30th of 1933. The program reads, more than 100 prints are in the show, largely black and white, although there's a small number of interesting excursions into the newer form of color printing. All the prints in this exhibition are the product of the past year, and a few, if any, have been shown in this vicinity before. Among the artists represented in the exhibition are Helen West Heller, H. Glintenkamp, J.J. Lanks, Blanche Lizelle, Alan Lewis, Thomas W. Nason, Berger Sanzin, Richard Zollner, and others. At the end of the first year in existence, it became apparent that one of the functions of the Woodcut Society should be the organization and management of an annual exhibition of woodcuts. To accomplish this purpose, the first annual exhibition of contemporary woodcuts was brought together, and this catalog shows the ready response made by practically all of the more important woodcut artists the world over. Entries were limited to woodcuts and block prints designed or cut during the calendar year 1932. In the announcement of the exhibition, it was stated that there would be no system of prizes or awards in connection with the event. Its primary purpose being to inform the public concerning the accomplishments of modern woodcut artists and to increase interest in the subject generally. It is felt that the exhibition is accomplishing its dual purpose in a highly satisfactory manner as it travels and is shown wherever wanted. It is thought the enthusiasm with which this first exhibition has been received will justify its becoming an annual affair and an important phase of the work of the Woodcut Society. Here's the roster. 5 countries are represented: Scotland, England, Belgium, Sweden, and the United States. There are 31 states represented: Rhode Island, New York, Oregon, Texas, Indiana, Kansas, West Virginia, Illinois, Missouri, New Jersey, Maine, Massachusetts, Michigan, Alabama, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, Connecticut, and Ohio. In his introduction to prints, 1490 through 1995, the collections of the Nelson Atkins Museum, curator George L. McKenna spoke about the traveling exhibits arranged by the Woodcut Society. He wrote, "In addition, the Society sponsored traveling exhibitions opening in Kansas City in 1932, 1933, 1935, and 1936 of woodcuts by contemporary American and European artists. Participants submitted 2 impressions of each of their prints, one for circulation and one for a permanent collection. The latter, comprising of 212 examples, was presented to the Nelson Atkins Museum between 1935 and 1939, forming the nucleus of our holdings of modern woodcuts." So here's a sample of that collection. Far left is by Ray Bethers. It's called Taxico. He's from Oregon, 1932. The middle one is by Blanche Lazelle, by Provincetown Studio. It's a color woodcut, West Virginia, 1932. And on the far right is by Anne Anderson, called A Tree. She's from Scotland, 1932. Rhea Garber, we don't know where she's from. Her title was Water Lilies, 1932. The middle one is Richardson Roam, called High Country. He's from Minnesota, 1932. The far right is Thomas Barrett, Steamroller. He's from New York, 1932. Far left is Richard Zollner, called Under the Big Top. He's from Ohio. The middle is by Alan Lewis. It's called Sower. He's from Alabama. And the far right is Ruth Saunders, called Adobe Bell, from California. This is a treasure trove. Please put it on display. What better time to install a public print study room at the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art? Now, there are 4 exhibits. Each is year specific. One can go through McKenna's print book, find the woodcuts and wood engravings that are a gift of the Woodcut Society, and locate the titles and the years of the artists for the year 1933, 1935, and 1936. Go do it. So how did Alfred Fowler find Fred Geary's work? I have a theory. Follow this. This is Richardson Roam. He is an etcher from Minnesota. In 1929, Mr. Roam came to work for John H. Bender at the Alden Galleries in Kansas City, Missouri. He worked the winter months of 1929, 1930, 1931, and 1932 as a lecturer and a manager. In the fall of 1933, Roam stepped down. That year, Alden Galleries published High Country and Artists, Colorado, a collection of 15 block prints by Roam. Roam held an associate membership with the Kansas City Society of Artists. He was one among several who had a studio at 1718 Holly Street in Kansas City. So that would imply that Bender and Leighton and Fowler communicated some. Maybe looked, I don't know, did he go to the Midwest Artist Association or, to see the exhibits? How did Alfred Fowler find all those woodcut artists? That is another talk for another day. This is an image of Alfred Fowler created by A.C., who most likely was Azashevitz. He was a wood engraver that Fowler published. Alfred Fowler was a gatherer. He kept his eyes on the lookout for the newest woodcuts. He was enthusiastic about what he found, and he shared it with others. He is a model for our time. Now, I see this attitude of discovery in you when you volunteer to give a talk for the society about something you had a passion for. Yeah, we've got all kinds of people. Every month they got a talk here. It's very exciting. We're a rare bunch, and we have so much fun. And I see this awareness in you when you find somebody exciting and you draw them into the Print Society. Thank you. You guys are busy at that. For me, Geary is a model of a working person pursuing something later in life, what we might call adult education these days. Because of him, because I want to know as much as I can about him, I try to do what he did. And I spent 3 years doing woodcuts, lino cuts, and a reduction cut. Briefly, this is a few things that I learned, and these all tie into Geary. Hand burnishing a woodblock print is complicated. The pressure needs to be even all over the block. Here are two proofs of a lino cut called Moss Creek, done by Karl Marxhausen. The proof on the left is acceptable. The one on the right has fainter areas where the hand pressure is uneven. You cannot see through the paper when you are burnishing. So you must be thorough and methodical when burnishing by hand. It takes concentration and perseverance, and solitude helps. And Dine said the same thing in his bio. Now there's a criticism of Geary because he didn't do a full edition. It is awfully difficult to do a hand-burnished edition. In 2011, I took part in a print exchange with Michael Jones of Let'sTradePrints.com. 23 proofs needed to have the same cleanness and clarity. And I like to have music when I'm working, and it makes a difference. And of course, when things are going really good and I got a handle on things, I like music that's pumping. But pumping music just made the proofs worse. I couldn't be flippant because it's so critical. You've done all this work, and when you're inking it up, that's like the most critical time. And so then I put on my monastic choral tunes, I have great respect for anybody who tries hand-burnished block prints. And now I can see why Geary said that he printed them just as he needed. Another thing that Dines has in his biography is that Geary was not market-based. He was not style-based. He was his own person. He had his job. That job was secure. He had money coming in. This was on the side. This was for himself. He was smart. There were people that made the editions. And yeah, you can make bigger bucks, do an edition of 200, sell the whole lot, get the money right up front, no piecemeal thing. That would be the smart thing to do, but he just And so, you know, if it says 5 of 50, there's probably only 5 out there. And when I got a call from somebody down in New Mexico a few months ago, and he said he found a color woodcut by Fred Geary, I said, well, are there any smudges? Are there any mistakes? Is everything lined up? Well, you should be really lucky that you found one, because it's probably the only one out there. And he bought it. The print exchange was also gave me a taste of what it's like to collect or acquire 22 works of paper from fellow printmakers. It's nice to have something from Russia, Australia, Canada, France, and the States, just for a $10 entry fee. Ha! Now, in regard to Geary's choice of composition, this last little thing is sort of about that. And I have my own opinion. First off, creating images from dug out slivers of wood is labor intensive. One plans the appearance way ahead. So much planning. Now Geary, he painted his wood blocks white, and then after it dried, he drew on it with pen and ink and let that dry. And then when he cut, wherever it was white, he cut that out. So that was an easy thing to do. Now I found this from someone else and I sort of like it. I chose to stain the bare wood a darker brown. See the slide. Then I could see the lighter areas appear each time I dug out the slivers of wood. Line making is stylized. It's not pencil where you put the mark down, that's it. It's its own thing. Dots and dashes will imply your form. Here is what it looks like cutting with a speedball cutter on a birch panel. Now, Geary's cuts were even more precise and harder to cut. Having done a few woodcuts myself, I look at each of Geary's pieces as a sampler for tried cuts, arranged as an overall design. So just take a moment, and I've isolated these areas to show you that each of these areas, Geary was tackling something. Do I go dark? Do I go light? And you got to think, you're starting with a black space. And anything that's going to be white has to be cut out a sliver of wood. This is Untitled, or A Homestead with Buggy with Fred Geary. The image measures 6 1/8 by 8 3/8 inches. The paper has a cream color. This print is in the Fred Geary collection at the Carrollton Public Library in Carrollton, Missouri. There is some glare from glass reflection. This is Untitled, or Elephants with Cart by Fred Geary. The image is 7 1/2 by 12 inches. The paper has a yellow tinge. This print is in the Fred Geary collection at the Carrollton Public Library in Carrollton. I agree with Dines that Geary's woodcuts are worthy of study. Now, I admire Geary. He was a learner, a businessman who explored woodcuts in midlife on his own terms. He is a model for our time. And where do I see this? Well, I see it every time we come together. This willingness to learn something new. And last year, I saw it when you attended a lithography workshop and made your marks on a clean lithostone for the group print. Yeah, way to go, team. Ernest Dines concluded his biography of Fred Geary with these words: years of friendship, acquaintanceship with a fellow worker's zeal, his inner thoughts often sensed, his hopes shared and sympathetically understood, permits a privilege untinctured by sentimentality, assumes commendation infused with verity, not just a duty to artist necrology, but to remind us that something of a man's qualities may continue to gladden our consciousness of intelligible and purposeful aspiration. Dines was not only a good friend, and he was a wood engraver, by the way, he admired and he celebrated his friend, and he is a model for our time. And I saw this celebration in many of you recently when you brought a fine print from home to the Society Salon and shared your delight of a particular artist. I see this admiration in you when you collect inked proofs of printmakers. So to recap, let's remember and celebrate these models for our time. People midlife who wants to try something new. That's like Fred Geary. Having friendship, admiration for each other or for artists. Ernest Dines. Being yourself. Making sandwiches. Making others feel welcome. That's Gertrude Wolfe Lighton. And eyes open for the new, enthusiastic, drawing others in. Alfred Fowler. We do this in our way because it gives us joy, satisfaction, and because we are able to do so. This time I want to give personal thanks to Fred Geary, Alfred Fowler, Gertrude Wolfe Lighton, and Ernest Dines. Thanks to Jesus for joy and curiosity, direction and connection, grace, forgiveness, and sanity. Thanks to Sherry Klein Smith, Sue Lightfoot, Nancy Warren, M.J. Poehler, Stuart Hines, the Carrollton Public Library, Missouri Valley Special Collections, the Janus Library, the Dr. Kenneth J. Labuda Department of Special Collections, and other librarians for ongoing research. Thanks to my wife Jan, and to Heather Paxton, Linda Lighton, J.D. Mooney, Terry Mooney, and John Jackson. Thanks to Ann Jeske with the Chillicothe School District who helped me with this PowerPoint. Thanks to Robin Gross and to the community that we call the Nelson Atkins Print Society. Thank you. Where are you dignitaries? Well, Joe Jackson and his wife, they're from Odessa. They gave us the Nautilus yearbook the year that Fred Geary graduated. He, hello, my name's John Jackson, and da-da-da, and I got this thing of Fred Geary. 1914, is anything still alive? You know, this thing's falling apart, so I got to get some neat images off of that. And I got a couple collectors here, Charles and Denitra Steele from Sugar Creek. Yay! And Julia Parkins, and her father was Fred Geary. And Howard is also an artist from Carrollton. And thank you for taking these cards. I've got blogs, but the best stuff is for today. Yeah, I'll take questions. Yeah. Let me put this back on.
What kind of wood do you think Geary worked on?
What kind of wood? Mm-hmm. It's in the biography, and I didn't bring it in my notes. Okay. That Dines goes into influences, and Geary raised chickens that he visited. He liked to come back to Carrollton and check on his rentals. There's all kinds of other information that's in there that I left out of this talk. And go find Marilyn, she'll have a copy of that in her library. Someone else? Yeah?
When you found that steamboat, where was that?
The American,
Where's the print located?
that's in the American Art Today. Is that what you?
The
Oh,
Bixby.
oh, the Bixby.
The Bixby.
That was from the State Historical. Actually, the book that they print. I pulled it out.
But it's in their collection too.
Yeah, it's in their
Down
collection.
at Columbia.
At Columbia.
In Columbia.
In Missouri.
Did it say how many they made
I don't know.
in your research?
I don't know. Good question.
Yeah.
Call
But
them
he didn't sign it either.
up. I don't know.
I had one of those, and I never knew who did it. And I don't remember even where I found it, but I had it.
How
I
exciting!
always wondered. if
This is
it
great.
was this print.
Wow.
I was just like, I never did anything with it. It sits in the flat box. I was shocked when I saw you put that up. Wait a minute. Who did you just say that was by?
I have to tell you this. When I first moved to Carrollton in 1990, there are these, nickel and dime places where you buy clothes and stuff. And there'd be a Geary there for like 25 bucks. And people would go into the library, oh, those are nice pen and ink drawings. Well, pen and ink, you still have to think, but you're not carving out of wood. So there's just misinformation all the way around.
I think it's because they're so black. Like that steamboat is really black. It gives the person a false impression maybe of how it was made.
I have to do the shout out. There's a guy in Chillicothe. He's got the Steamboat Idlewild. It's like that really old thing around there, and it has the labels for the Denver Museum and this here in there, and then the one from the Union Station. And he's just holding out for lots of money, but he wants to sell. And he's disappointed with eBay because his little trinket, it was worth nothing now because everybody has one and like that. But there's Geary's out there to be sold. There's a guy in Overland Park. He emailed me, oh yeah, I got this and this, and he shot some photos. So there's stuff around. I got a really nice one from the Fine Arts Center in Colorado. As a color, has some soldiers on a horse. And I've never seen it. So, I mean, just because the people in Columbia have 60 or 40 of Geary's prints doesn't mean they have all the prints. The ones that I showed you that the Nelson has, they don't have. So, and then his aunt bequeathed a lot of his prints to the Library of Congress. So I think you can go online there and check some of those out. Some more questions?
Well, then,
Thank you for coming.
thank you very much.